Hello everybody, thank you for joining this webinar. I'm going to be talking to you today about how you can prepare for your medical device or IVD product development, and in particular for clinical evaluation. Before I do that, I'll just tell you a little bit about who we are. So EG Technology, we're a product design and development consultancy based in Cambridge. We help startups in the medtech as well as biotech and agritech and various sectors to develop their concepts all the way through to transfer to manufacture, really in particular bridging that gap between innovation and a market-ready product. We have lots of different engineering capabilities in-house: mechanical, industrial design, electronics, software, and human factors or usability engineering, as well as the necessary project management and quality assurance capabilities in-house as well. And my name's Kella Kapnisi. I've worked at EG for nearly 4 years now. I'm a project manager here, and also a keen interest in usability engineering in particular, as well as project management process development. So today I'm going to be talking to you about what you need to do before clinical evaluation, really trying to put all the different pieces of the product development puzzle together for you. And I'm going to be doing that by talking around this development program. I know there's a lot going on in this diagram, and I don't want to phase you. I'll be going through it bit by bit. This is our EG, our product development framework, and it is only a framework from our experience working on many projects, but it does need to be tailored on a project by project basis. I'm going to talk through the different swim lanes that we have down the left here, and how that progresses through the stages of product development, concept generation, detailed design and development, transfer to manufacture, all the way through to market launch. That is time from left to right, but it's probably not proportional for time, especially as this varies, as I said, on a project by project basis. But I'm hoping it gives you the kind of overview of the different things you're going to need to be thinking about at different stages to help you see what gaps you may have, or what you need to do at different points. So going into a little bit more detail, line by line. The first one here, product design and development, and this is probably the typical process that people think of. Starts with generating your concepts, then testing those concepts out a bit as feasibility work to mitigate what you consider to be the key challenges of that product, before then going into the full detailed design and prototyping stages. And these will be iterative stages that you can iterate as many times as you need. We have alpha and beta here, but it may be more than that. Increasing in fidelity of your prototypes until you are ready to go into the transfer to manufacture stage, where your design will be transferred as a production design with full design for manufacture having been implemented, for that to then go into the manufacture and assembly process to make your pilot units that you'll use for various different aspects of your testing. In this swim lane here, we've got acceptance testing, which is the factory acceptance testing that your manufacturers will do to check that your pilot units have been made correctly. That's not compliance or verification testing, which I'll come to in other swim lanes. And then, of course, even after market launch, there's going to be ongoing support, production updates, that kind of thing. As well as that core development program that you would think of, there are lots of different aspects that need to be happening in parallel and interact with that very closely. The first of those that I'm going to talk about is human factors, or also known as usability engineering, and this is based on IEC 62366, the usability engineering process. And as you can see, this happens right from the beginning all the way throughout, starting with primary user research, making sure you speak to real users and understand their real user needs, use risk analysis and user interface specification. The idea of usability engineering is really to prove that your user interface is safe for use. So you start by understanding the use risks and defining the user interface, and then during detailed design and development, you will test the prototypes that you make on users, and this is the formative evaluation stage. And the results of those formative evaluations should feed back in to your detailed design, and you'll update your use risk analysis as you go, because you'll learn new things as you do those user studies. Then once you get to the transfer to manufacture stages with pilot units, so they need to be production representative units with production representative labeling, IFU and packaging ready for these studies as well. You'll then do your summative evaluation, which is more of the final evaluation that does in fact prove ideally that your user interface is safe to use. You then compile all of the documents from this whole process with a summary report together in your usability engineering file. And you'll notice that you're interacting with real users all the way throughout, and that's really the key here. It will ensure that you are making the right product right from the beginning, and that it will be safe for your users. The next one I've got here to talk about is risk management. This is also another very important stream in product development, and particularly the regulations. So this process that I've described here is in line with ISO 14971, which you will need to comply with. And once again, you can see this process has different elements happening all the way throughout, starting with planning. So RM plan here means risk management plan. Plan out what you're going to do, what your scoring metrics are, what your definitions are, that kind of thing. And then in the early stages, even though you don't have a detailed design, even in your concept generation stages, you can start to identify the top level hazards and harms that your product presents. If you know if you're expecting to have electronics in it, or if it's an implantable, some of those key elements that can help you start to identify potential harms and use that information to feed into your design by knowing what those key risks are. Then as you progress into detailed design, you can go into a bit more detail. We typically start with a preliminary hazard analysis using the hazards and harms that we've identified to then identify risks and hazardous scenarios that we think could happen with the early design concepts, to then identify ways we can mitigate those risks and feed that back into the next iteration of the design. Then in the later stages, we typically do a DFMEA, design failure mode effects analysis, which is similar but goes into a little bit more detail, more fine grain. It's better to do this when you have a design to drill down on in detail, but early enough that you can you still have chances to make changes to those designs based on the mitigations that you identify and want to implement. Then once you go into the transfer to manufacture phase, there might be other types of FMEA you want to do, such as a process FMEA or a transport FMEA, depending on your product and your processes, and what might be key risks to look into and to mitigate. The last few stages of this process are typically going to happen after clinical evaluation. This is identifying what residual risks are left, and there will be residual risks. The aim is to mitigate the risks as best as possible, but you can't mitigate all of them or remove them altogether. So you have to identify what your residual risks are, and then do a risk benefit analysis. And it's important this is done by suitable people with the relevant knowledge and expertise, typically the relevant clinical expertise, in order to really assess whether the benefits suitably outweigh the risks for your product. And this all gets compiled into a risk management report at the end. The next stream I'm going to talk about here is verification and validation. And what this process really describes from left to right here is the V model. You may not be familiar with that. And we have posted blogs about this and done webinars about this section in particular a few times, so feel free to get in touch if you want a bit more detail on this, or have a look around on our website. But in a sort of summary, The V model is about identifying, first of all, your user needs or user requirement specification, which is all about what the requirements are from the user's perspective. You then use that and other information you have to define your product requirement specification, which is about the functional and performance requirements of your product. And the most important thing to remember is that then once you've designed and you're going into your final verification and validation stages, is that you verify against your product requirement specification and you validate against your user requirement specification. And that's what you're seeing here, with also not forgetting the compliance testing, which is a part of your verification testing, but focused in on the particular standards that relate to your product. So, for example, it might be EMC testing or biocompatibility testing or 60601 testing. So it depends what standards apply to your product, and it's important to identify those standards early on so that you can include all of that testing and the time it takes, along with your other formal verification testing and validation testing into your verification and validation test plan early on. Next up is quality, obviously very closely related to verification and validation, but has some additional elements to it. There are sort of two sides to this. One is the overarching setup of your quality management system in line with ISO 13485 or the FDA equivalent. And that's something you're required to do as the legal manufacturer of the product. You need to be ISO 13485 certified. For some smaller startups, what they prefer to do is subcontract that out and have an organization who acts as legal manufacturer and has ISO 13485 certification. So you can look into doing that as well. But either way, within your development program, you're going to need to think about that and think about what your strategy is, and how you're going to go about setting that up and having it in place for when you need to for launch. And then the other side is executing that quality management system, which will include all of your different processes for safe product development, which includes requirements management, includes your process for going about verification and validation, your supplier selection, supplier evaluations, managing the manufacturing and assembly quality control processes, as well as change control, which happens after you've frozen the design at transfer to manufacture stage, to ensure the design, any changes to the design from that point onwards are very tightly controlled and documented. It also includes design reviews, formally documenting those as you go through, all that kind of thing. Then these last three at the bottom here are the ones that we at EG are least involved with. Any of the boxes that you've seen on this diagram that have a color fill in them are ones that we do for our clients as needed, and the ones with the white fill are ones that services we don't offer at EG, and if you're not doing those aspects yourself, you'll likely want to identify third parties to use for that. We can recommend people if you need. Clinical and regulatory expertise is a good example of that. Highly recommend using specialists, or at least consulting them to help you with the clinical evaluation and regulatory parts of the process. The one thing I want to point out on this stream, though, looking at the clinical evaluation swim lane, is that it doesn't just happen at the end. Don't wait till the last minute to think about it when you actually want to do your clinical evaluation, thinking about what's going to be involved, who you're going to need, how that's going to be executed, getting ethics approval and all of that kind of thing. You'll want to be starting to think about that and plan that from the beginning and throughout. Next up, market access. This is one that's often forgotten about, and also, as you can see, happens throughout. Starts with your market assessment or market research, making sure that you truly understand who your users and customers are, and the market surrounding the application, and then as you go through competitor assessments and ongoing competitor assessments, as well as planning your route to market strategy, and as you get nearer launch, planning your market strategy for launch. And just to the last point on this, particularly the first stages, the market research stages, 50%, I believe the statistic is 50% of startups that fail attribute it to there being no market need for their product. So it's really very important to make sure you've understood what the market need is and that it's there early on in your process. The last one at the bottom here, intellectual property. Of course, I'm sure you'll all be aware you need to be thinking about this, and it's probably no surprise that you need to be thinking about it throughout. And there are different aspects to IP protection, design, brand protection, all those kinds of things. And once again, consult a specialist to ensure your intellectual property is protected all the way through as it needs to be. Then the final swim lane I want to point out is back at the top here, program management of all of these different processes. You can see they're all quite varied and have different specialisms and important aspects about them, and they all interact with one another. They're not happening in isolation. They are very much interlinked and interwoven. And so having the right people with the right experience, or an organization with the right experience to oversee all of that and make sure it all interconnects as it should, and when it should, will play a big role in the success of working your way through this program. So finally, this is back to the whole picture of the development program, or the framework at least, and back to the original question: what do you need to do before clinical evaluation? Well, almost everything. It's probably easier to tell you the points that you do after clinical evaluation. That is going to be one of the last stages, as you would expect. You need to have designed your product, made representative production units. You need to have done large chunks of your formal testing already to prove that it meets your requirements, it's safe to use, it meets the standards, before you then evaluate them from a clinical evaluation point of view on your patients or users. The steps that happen after clinical evaluation, the steps I was talking about on risk earlier, the risk benefit analysis will need to take into account the results of your clinical evaluation and form part of your risk management report. And then all of these different aspects come together to form your technical file. So accept your design files and your factory acceptance and manufacturing test files, usability engineering file, your risk management file, all of your verification and validation testing and compliance testing reports, and obviously your clinical evaluation will all be compiled together in your technical file, which will be submitted for notified body review or possibly self-certification if you're able to self-certify, depending on the classification of your device. And then after that, hopefully you'll get your CE mark approval, or maybe you're going for FDA, similar process, and you can then launch your product. And there's still ongoing work to be done even after that. You need to do your post-market surveillance. You still need to manage the product under ISO 13485 and your quality management system. And you may want to make updates and things like that going forward. But from that point on, your product will be on the market. So I hope that's helped you today to get a better understanding of all the different aspects of what's happening in the product development process, and how you can make sure you have all of the different pieces of the puzzle in place before you take on clinical evaluation. So, and I wish you all good luck with all of that. If there's anything you want to get in touch with us about, or any further information you'd like on any of the information I've talked about today, please feel free to get in touch. My name is Kella Kapnisi. You can feel free to email me. Thank you very much.